Greetings. This video is an attempt to explain why the flat earth arguments exist online. If you are very active online, especially on YouTube, you'll notice that there has been, for the last several years, a lot of videos, arguments, debates, and a lot of information flying around about the flat earth theory, which the primary model is something like this, as opposed to what the tradition says and science says is what we live on, the globe. Now, like I said, I'm going to try to explain why this exists. I'm going to go over the information that exists that is causing people to think that the earth is flat. So hopefully it's I can present enough information to be helpful that you can see, you can at least see that's why they think the earth is flat. It's because of these things. And it's a lot of information. I'll try not to take too long to go over it. I'll also attempt to answer, as far as I know, what would be some common questions, maybe straighten out a few misconceptions. But, for one thing, people tend to fall in at least three categories. There's those who are open-minded. When they hear about a new subject such as flat earth, they say, oh, that sounds neat, I want to look into that. And they take time to research it. And this could be any subject. Open-minded people are open to learning and hearing about any subject. Category two are those people that are closed-minded, frankly. They hear something, and if they think it's strange, odd, weird, they're like, no, that's ridiculous. They push off, they don't want to hear it. And if you think about it, probably everybody on earth is open-minded to a set of things. A person who's considered open-minded in general is open to more. And a closed-minded person is someone who, they might actually only be closed-minded on certain subjects, on certain things. This is one of those subjects that tends to be very controversial. And it readily creates the cognitive dissonance when you hear the term flat earth. Excuse me. So it's not everybody's closed-minded about everything. You can meet someone who's very intelligent, who's very smart, and who's generally open-minded about a lot of subjects, but you bring up flat earth and they're like, that's ridiculous, and they don't want to hear about it. So they just wanted to give that explanation. It's not necessarily, open-minded versus closed-minded. It's just saying on this subject because of what it is. So enough of that. And of course, there's also a third category of people I haven't got to yet, and those are those who don't care. You tell them something's like this, they're like, oh, that's neat, whatever. They seriously could care less. So, for those of you who want to know more, this video will hopefully be helpful. Now, this video is part of a playlist. If you're watching this on its own, there are other videos that will further explain what's going on here, and I should have it linked below, my playlist of all of the other videos that I believe do a very good job of pointing out some very key elements in the flat earth study. So, why do people believe they're flat earth? Well, let's look at some of the science. There's specific science experiments that you can look up that demonstrate some problems with certain aspects of globe theory. The Michelson-Morley experiment, the Aries failure experiment are two that have to do with light. Tests were set up to try to capture, and for instance, Aries experiment or Aries failure, he had some kind of tube full of water, and it was supposed to demonstrate that as the Earth is moving and light comes down, it's going to enter the tube a certain way. I'm being very simplistic, of course, in describing Aries experiment. But it's called Aries failure because this experiment, the first setup didn't work. He had to adjust it because he's a smart guy, and he realized, well, let me adjust it for if the Earth is sitting still. And the experiment worked. Very similar results occur with the Michelson-Morley experiment, only they were using mirrors. Other experiments you can look up are the Fitzgerald-Lorentz experiment, the Michelson-Gale experiment, and the Sagnac experiment. Just try Googling those if you really want to, And of course, as I said, in my playlist, there's a number of sources. And if you watch those videos, they'll go over some of these things in a little more detail. But these science experiments exist, and people use them for flat Earth because they help to demonstrate that either the Earth is not moving, or there's no proof for gravity, something along those lines. That's why this is some of the science. And there's issues with the astrolabe, how that works, the sextant, stars not moving, that's a whole issue in and of itself. There's issues with the gyroscope, and you can watch videos and people will give very sound explanations going both ways for the gyroscope, at least that I've seen, where they explain with gravity, the gyroscope of course is always going to point inwards, and the flat Earth people say, well, no, the gyroscope always points down because the Earth is flat. I couldn't get into the science of that because I don't understand it, but these are some of the arguments that exist online. Now to get into some of the stuff which is, I don't know, maybe you call it circumstantial evidence, but there's a lot of this. Radio broadcasting, the Empire Service, the history of the Empire Radio Broadcasting Service is very interesting because this goes far back into, I believe, 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, and we were able to broadcast radio signals, you know, across the country, across the nation, across the oceans without a problem. Of course, the flat Earth theorists would say, well, that's why, because you can just shoot the signal straight across. But then, of course, the counter argument is that, well, the globe explanation is that you can bounce signals off of some part of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere, there's many different layers to it, according to science. So there is that. However, when you get into the details of how the Empire Radio Broadcast Service did the work, which I think is just called the Empire Service, but it has to do with radio broadcasting. They have some specific, like what they did, and some of those things that they explained, they didn't have to do any kind of bouncing off the atmosphere. The signals were sent straight from tower to tower. Again, you can look into that yourself if you want to. A really big one is plane flights. This one's interesting because there's some stuff that doesn't get explained, and some of the easy ways to see what I mean is, if you look up, whenever they do emergency plane landings on long flights, a very specific one that was pretty public was when a woman needed to give birth to her baby. She was flying, I believe, from Australia, somewhere in that area, over to California. And when you look on a map, if I were to hold this one up, I don't know if you can see it, but California, Australia on a flat Earth, that was the route. That was the route that they showed on the news. And this is what's very interesting, that they showed that route on the news, that they're flying this way. But for their emergency landing, instead of stopping in Hawaii, they went up here to Alaska. I'm sorry, they're up here to Alaska for the emergency stop. And of course, on a globe model, and mine's falling apart here, but you know, Alaska is right here. California is where this part is missing. So on a globe model, that doesn't quite make sense that you're going from here to over here, but you do an emergency landing up here. Because according to the map, they were closer, they should have been closer to Hawaii, according to this. But they weren't, and that's where, and this is one example of many that are like this. Emergency plane landings. There's a whole issue, and Mark Sargent in his video goes in depth of the southern hemisphere. So everything below the equator, you can track your plane. You can track your friend's plane, your family's plane. If someone's traveling, you can track the planes online, except in the southern hemisphere when they get an hour offshore. When they get an hour offshore of any continent in the southern hemisphere, the tracking system will shut off. The plane will disappear as far as tracking goes, and it'll have an estimation of where it is and an estimated time of arrival. And it'll reappear again when it gets to the next continent. So that's very interesting. I don't know how to answer that. There's a whole lot of other stuff when it comes to plane flights, about planes flying and landing in the atmosphere. Within the atmosphere, there's a very interesting argument about, you know, if the Earth is spinning, which scientists say it is, and the plane's flying in the opposite direction, you'd think they'd be able to get somewhere faster because, you know, the Earth is spinning as the plane flies, but for some reason that doesn't work. I don't know. I don't know why that doesn't work. When you get into the math of the spin of the Earth, when you get into the math of the globe of the Earth, there's a lot of issues. So plane flights, that's a whole circumstantial piece of evidence that flat earthers use. Long view distances, this one's very interesting. And I guess I should put it in the comments, the link to a website that I know of where they have, at least on this website, longest views ever recorded. And they can see quite far, ridiculously far, too far for this. It's too far. Because, of course, it makes sense on a flat earth. And a lot of it has to do with atmospherics. The atmosphere, how it works, you can't always see that far because of moisture content, pollution, cloud, vapor, all this kind of thing. Temperature might even have a play. But with modern cameras and their super zooms, you can zoom really far, they can see things that should not be able to be seen. And we're talking not just up high, because of course you can see farther up high, but even then, they're still seeing way farther than they're supposed to. You see a globe, I guess I should explain. A globe is supposed to have 8 inches of curve, 8 inches of drop for every mile. So every mile you see on the globe, mathematically, there's supposed to be an 8-inch drop. Now, of course, we know there's mountains and hills and there's all kinds of things going on. Still, you can go online. There's websites that are produced where you can put in the math and see how much of a drop you're supposed to see. Where it really shows out is over the seas, because over the seas, you know, water always levels, which that's an interesting problem in and of itself. Of course, the globalists will say, well, gravity keeps the water here, but the problem is whenever they do tests, laser tests across large bodies of water, such as Lake Michigan, Lake Titicaca, Lake Victoria in Africa. Lake Titicaca is here in South America, up in the mountains of Peru. The salt flats in South America, some of the salt flats in the deserts. They always come back to very level. I believe it was the University of... I wish I could remember. One of our American universities, one of the big ones, the Ivy League schools, did a test in Kansas, and it's readily available online, with the flatness of Kansas. And they said Kansas was more flat than a pancake. And they did their tests. And there's a documentary that was just put out by a group. Now, they went into some stuff, I don't know why. But within the documentary, they did a whole lot of laser tests. And they did laser tests at the lake in South America. They did laser tests at several other points and some very long distances across water. And it demonstrated very perfectly level and flat areas of water that were many, many miles. And I don't remember the numbers, but you can look up the Convex Earth documentary. That's where that comes into place. But so long view distances is very interesting. I don't know what the globe argument would be for that, because some of these are just too long, just too far. The Bible, that's a very interesting one. The first verse most globalists will go to, especially if they're Christian, when trying to prove that the earth is round or globular, spherical, is Isaiah 40:22, which talk about God sitting on the circle of the earth. The problem is, well, there is no problem. God can sit on this circle, technically, just as much as he can sit on this circle. And people will get into so much ridiculousness arguing over this subject about what does the Bible say? Circle means this. No, circle means that. Well, yes, there's circles within, built into a sphere, but this is a sphere. It's a ball. And that's what's interesting. The very same book of Isaiah, Isaiah 22, verse 18, uses the word ball. Talking allegorically, of course, about, I think he's talking about Israel throwing him like a ball, tossing him like a ball. So the word in Hebrew, ball, did exist, because it's translated thus in Isaiah 22:18. Whereas in the same book, Isaiah 40:22, God sits on the circle of the earth. So when you get into the semantics and the technicality, the flat earthers win this argument. At least I would think so from a technical point of view. Because if God wanted to say, I sit on the ball of the earth, why didn't he use that term? We don't know. We don't know why. Unfortunately, that's the only verse that's like that. I've seen others try to make some arguments such as in Luke, where it's predicting the future about when Christ comes and takes people away. Some people will be sleeping, and that same day some people will be working. They say, well, see, that means the globe because the sun. But that's not a problem, because in the flat earth model, the sun is a spotlight. It only shines around a certain area at a time as it goes around the earth. So there's no problem there if you understand the flat earth model. Anyways, let's get into a little more of the Bible. The Bible has, now I've looked it up in Strong's, the word firmament, the firmament in the globe model is understood to be the heavens right above the earth, where the birds fly according to Genesis, the firmament. So it's this area. What's interesting is if you pay attention to Genesis chapter 2, God says he puts the sun and the moon in the firmament, within the firmament. And you can look up the Hebrew to confirm that that can't be translated any other way. These objects are within the firmament. How can that be on the globe? When according to science, we know that the sun is, 93 million miles away out in space. So I don't know how to explain that. Again, the flat earthers win that Bible argument because the sun and moon, I mean, the word seems to say they're in the firmament. But the firmament can also sometimes, okay, like I said, in the King James Version, Old Testament, the word firmament is used 17 times. And sometimes the word can be translated, or it has a meaning of dome or vault. That is very interesting because of what the ancient Hebrew concept of the earth is. You can find this online. But as you can see, there's the dome here, and the outside, underneath. I don't know if maybe this is what's floating in space. There is a sphere floating in space, and this is what's going on inside. Anyways, this is what the ancient Hebrews believed the earth used to look like. Okay? So you see there the sun and the moon inside the firmament. And this is the dome, the outer area, or the edge of the firmament. Now, here's another simplistic drawing concept of what it could look like. And then Rob Skiba has an illustration like this, where he goes through and uses not only the Bible, but Book of Enoch, Book of Jasher, looking into details, but especially the Book of Enoch. And it seems to be some kind of chambers built alongside, and this firmament sits inside a giant chamber that's full of water, and on top is heaven. It's where God's throne is. So God can literally sit here and look down and watch over the earth. Anyways, so these are some of the concepts and some of the ideas of what the earth firmament dome might look like. But you can look at the verses yourself. There's 22 verses that reference the dome, firmament, vault. I guess I can go ahead and read them off. That way you just make it easy for you to have them. So of course you can pause the video as you need to. Job 22:14, Job 37:18. No, I'm sorry, these are out of order, but as I found them, I wrote them down. Genesis 1:6-8, Genesis 1:20, Exodus 24:10, Psalm 104:2, Proverbs 8, verses 27-28, Isaiah 40:21-22, Isaiah 45:12, Isaiah 66:1, Jeremiah 10:12, Jeremiah 51:15, Ezekiel 1:22-26, Amos 9:6, and these verses once again are talking about the firmament. And you can get a lexicon. I would recommend a lexicon that has to do the Stuttgartensia. You want to have the correct translation, the right text, but a lexicon to look into the Hebrew behind the word firmament, vault, dome. If all you have access to is a Strong's, that's fine. But of course, you can go online. You can go online. Just remember the Hebraic Stuttgartensia. You want the Masoretic, unabridged Masoretic text, Hebrew translation, if you want to look deeper into the words. Other verses that tie in and seem to fit the flat earth argument is the verses, there's 26 of them, that have to do with God's throne sitting above the heavens or above the waters. And again, it's true. You can interpret things in a different sort of way. But the fact remains that there is the interpretation that fits the flat earth model. Sun, moon, and stars being in the firmament, or referencing the sun, moon, and stars having to do with the firmament. There's 13 verses in the Bible that I have found. I should make that note. There might be more verses on these subjects, but this is the verses I found. So God's throne above, 26 verses, 13 verses on the sun, moon, and stars. Windows in heaven, earth inscribed, circular, four corners. There are 43 verses that have to do with that. And then stationary earth. This is the most interesting one. Stationary earth, because of course science tells us that this globe moves through the heavens around the sun. Yet the earth seems to indicate that the Bible seems to indicate that the earth does not move. There's 17 different verses. And I suppose what I could do is in the description I can write out each of these verses that I found under the subject heading. So yeah, I guess I'll do that. So we've been over radio broadcasting signals, plane signals, some of the science, long view distances, and Bible. And then there's ancient records. We already briefly mentioned the Hebrew ancient records. And of course, there are, if you were to look into other ancient cultures, just as ancient cultures have a creation mythology, flood mythology, Tower of Babel, often mythology, not all of them have that, not as many, but there's a lot of that. There's mythology on giants, mythology on fallen angels. There's also a mythology about, or an explanation about the earth, and it's flat. They have all kinds of different ways of describing it, and when you look it up online, you can see very interesting pictures. The Mayans and the Aztecs, they have some kind of like pyramid mountain in the middle of the earth, and then the different continents spread around under a dome. The Egyptian cosmology, of course, has the land, and they're very simplistic. They believe there's the Nile, the desert goes off into the wilderness, and then across the Red Sea, and more desert off in the other way. They knew there was more of the world, but they simplified, and their drawing just kind of focuses on Egypt. And then it has this, it looks like a female. She's stretched out over the top, and she represents the heavens. Again, that dome structure. So it's very interesting. Coming at this from a creation science point of view, we put some stock in what these ancient legends believe. Because, for instance, flood legends, there is some science to the fact that if you have a consistent report across time, cultures, and many different peoples, and they're all saying the same thing, well, that would harken back to truth. That this is true, the Bible is true, which of course us Christians, Bible believers, do believe. So this is very interesting when it comes to the flat earth argument. And ancient cultures, that they all have the similar story, that the earth is flat. They try and argue, there are arguments that there are believers in the earth being round, going as far back as the Greeks. The most famous story is, and I can't remember his name, but he did the two stick in the shadows, one in Alexandria, Egypt, and another in Athens or whatever. I can't remember. But he did two sticks in two different places, greatly spaced apart. And of course, the shadow cast by the stick, he could therefore extrapolate with some math. I don't know if it was early trigonometry. It might have been. That where the sun is, and indicate that it was very far away, or that the earth was round. Well, that's the funny thing about math, is it can actually work in several different ways. And this is one of those, where yes, you can indicate that, placing a stick here in Athens or a stick here in Egypt might have different angles at it with the shadow of the sun. The same thing can happen here as the sun is moving around. It's going to do the same exact thing with the shadows. And so that doesn't prove either way. But specifically from the globe Earth arguments, when they try to use that to prove the globe, it doesn't prove the globe because the math works on both models. The tower cell grid, this is similar to the radio broadcast signals, but whereas a lot of our modern technology relies on some pretty basic, grounded apparatus, and this is something you'd have to go and look for yourself, but it's online, it exists. The pictures, explanations, expert videos, History Channel does modern marvel explanations, undersea cables, and this is how the world connects its internet and communications and signals. And then you have cell towers all across the nation that connects the cell phones. It's assumed that satellites are involved, but from my research, satellites, besides people saying that they do, and even experts will say, oh yeah, we use satellites or whatever, but when you actually get down to the details, when you study the subject, why are there cell towers? Why are these cell towers used for phone signals? Like, what's the deal here? Do they use the satellites? And of course, the satellites is a big contentious argument between those who believe in the globe and the flat Earth, because this one, I mean, maybe they're up here because somehow this thing floats around. So if scientists could, behind the scenes, in the secret government, that kind of thing, if they can figure out how to replicate this technology, then yeah, you could have satellites up there, but do you need to? Or do they even have it? Part of my playlist that I'll be linking is the International Space Station live footage. And it seems very realistic. There are some problems with it, though, as you'll notice. And again, this would fit the flat Earth model because, and this goes deep. NASA, everything to do with NASA seems to be, well, it falls into the category of suspect. If you have a skeptical mind and you're examining everything they do, the moon landings, there's a lot of problems there, and I've linked again in my playlist the video of funny thing happened on the way to the moon. I have personally met and talked with a tech sergeant who got to see the hangar in Nevada. He got to go inside. He was shown around just the one time because it was a top secret area. Inside this hangar was a moon escape. It was designed. It was a set built for picture taking. And that's what the guy explained. This was for taking pictures. This moon landing hangar. Inside there was a moon lander. There was a lunar surface. It looked like the moon, black background with a mountain, but it was a stage. So because that exists, because NASA, and you can look this up, explains that aside from maybe 2 photographs, all of the pictures and the images up till today of the globe from space are composites. In other words, they're photoshopped. And as the video famously says, they have to be. If you go through my playlist and you watch all these things, if you want to, you can see for yourself that they do. They create. It's pretty easy to tell too. The pictures of Earth. They'll have the copy and paste clouds going on. They'll even put little messages, letters in the clouds. And each picture looks different. There's a pretty infamous 2013 image of Earth, and North America is blown up really big. And if you look at other images of Earth, it's a lot smaller. This one's, and it's a little broken here, supposed to be more close to realistic, but you see how the size of America here compared to like Africa and everything. If you just do it, Google Earth images, Earth globe, and look at the images. Look at them for yourself. Go to NASA's website. Look at their images right there on NASA. You can see them for yourself. And there's a problem here. So what this does is this puts everything that NASA does in suspect. And I was talking about International Space Station footage. What is frustrating with their footage is and you'll see, it's live. I have it in my playlist, but you can look it up on YouTube. It's marked as live. When you pull it up, it says live in the corner, up in the one corner and down in the other corner. But if you watch it long enough, you can notice a few problems. One problem is the camera will very obviously cut. The one time I was watching, the astronaut, he takes the camera, he faces it toward himself, he smiles, and then the scene suddenly changes. In other words, it stops and it's suddenly it's a different camera. And maybe you can argue it's another person with a camera. The problem was he's looking at this metal, whatever this apparatus was that you saw earlier. It's like he's just moved. Like the camera was stopped and shot. Besides the earth beneath, suddenly moved. It was a different place. Because you can, for the most part, see. Sometimes it's bright. It's just white, but you can usually see when nothing's obstructing it, the earth and where it is. But it seemed pretty obvious, and they did it 3 times while I was watching over the course of an hour. The footage it's not live. It's pre-recorded, I guess. I don't know how that works. I don't understand. If it's not live, that's fine. I just don't know why they mark it as live when it's not live footage. That, and if you look out at, it looks like you're flying over the globe, but you look at some of the structures, and again, you can see this stuff when it's on the ground, when it's being built. You can look at the pictures online. The solar panels are not curved; they're straight, as well as the long arm that the Canadian Space Agency created. These things are straight, but on the video, especially when they're near the edges of the field of view, they bend. In other words, there's some kind of fisheye lens on this camera, and so if it's curving and bending, all these things, it makes you wonder: is it doing the same thing to the Earth down there? And sometimes when the Earth gets high in the picture in the camera, you see it change, especially when it goes up and down, the curvature changes. So the live footage from the ISS basically is not helpful for this theory. It doesn't lend a lot of credence to it. Unfortunately, it lends itself to demonstrating that you can't really trust NASA, which is not helpful because NASA is, of course, our primary source for video and footage of space, of what's going on up there, of the planets and the higher atmosphere, the globe. And if you can't trust NASA, well, there goes a whole bunch of your proof trying to prove this. So that's not helpful. Some other, and I put it on the different side here, some other science experiments that have been done, and I saw that they recently replicated this experiment recently, which is good science. When an experiment is done, it's successful, decades or centuries later, you can do the same thing and get the same result. That's science. It's part of the scientific method anyways. Bedford Canal experiment is what I'm mentioning here. This one is just the canal goes for many miles. They're in, I want to say it's England, and whenever they do the tests, the tests come out show that the canal from one end to the other, over the course of many miles, from up here in England to down there, it's a good distance, shows being level and flat. Coriolis effect. This one's fun. This is probably one of the better arguments for the globe. Maybe. Unfortunately, the flat Earth do have what seems to be a good explanation, a scientific explanation for the Coriolis effect. The first problem, got to address this. The first problem is if you go and study this, talk to all the people who are supposed to deal with Coriolis effect. People who fire in the military, who fire weapons a long distance. Do they have to take the Coriolis effect into account? Some say yes. If I remember right, my brother who is in a tank said yes, he does. It's built into the calculations, if I remember right. I have another brother shoots fire howitzers and Marines, or he did. I don't know if I ever asked him. I should have. Anyways, I've heard both. There's testimony online, both in videos you can watch, radio programs you can listen to. Pilots, when it comes to science experiments, long-range weapons tests, shooting just for fun or for, again, military. It's not consistent. Some people take into account the Coriolis effect, and they say they have to. Others say, no, we never do. Why? It doesn't bother us. One specific instance that I remember was a Navy gunner, and his guns fire many, many miles. I wish I could remember numbers better. For some reason, I just don't remember numbers all that well. But yeah, I'm not even going to give a guess because I'll give it wrong. But it was a very long distance that the Navy gunner would fire from the ships, and they did not have to take into account Coriolis effect, or at least he didn't. So that's interesting, that there's kind of an inconsistency, but there might be an explanation on the globe that doesn't make sense. You know, it should be very consistent. The Coriolis effect, according to science, should affect everywhere all the time. But again, if you did the research yourself, you'd see that there's, at least that's what I've seen, there's an inconsistency. Not everybody has to take it into effect. I only saw one video on the topic, but there was a video that the guy seemed to indicate that the Coriolis effect is false. He said there's other scientific factors that create what is called the Coriolis effect, and so it's not actually a globe thing. It has to do with a combination of temperature, density, velocity, all these things together can cause a Coriolis effect. I didn't understand it. It was getting a bit too technical, but that theory does exist. So, how does the flat Earth explain Coriolis effect? Well, the flat Earth, on a flat Earth, electromagnetism is the big explanation for a lot of what's going on, and it might even be what's keeping the sun and the moon up in the air above. However, with the Coriolis effect, there is one explanation that says that the sun produces an electromagnetic effect as it's going around. So, if you are doing long-range projectile firing, missile firing, when you're in that electromagnetic pulse of the sun, which often happens, people do their work in the day, the sun is what's causing the Coriolis effect. So, depending on where you are in relation to the sun, you could be within that range. Again, I don't fully understand it. I just know that there's a scientific explanation that exists to explain the Coriolis effect on the flat Earth as well as on the globe. The inconsistency of the use of Coriolis effect and how it affects people firing long range is inconsistent, and that doesn't make sense on the globe. At least I haven't yet heard an explanation for that. On the flat Earth, I have. Because depending on where you are in association with the sun, it could or could not affect you. So we talked about that, Marine, Navy, Army gunners, that has to do with that. Ooh, as another science experiment, the Dr. Samuel, oh dear, I should have wrote that better, Rodathan experiments, Rodathan. I think it's Rodathan. Rodathan. Usually I write neat. Occasionally I wrote too fast. I was probably taking notes off of a video with this, so I tend to write fast. I have a note here on convex, concave, flatness of water. Some people are very convinced just with the flatness of water, especially when they do tests across bays, gulfs, or sections of the ocean. In the video I mentioned earlier, the documentary, Convex Earth documentary, they send a boat very far out into the ocean to do some tests. Something I should mention here. One of the arguments that the globalists will use, against flat Earth is they say, well, you can stand on the shore, especially where it's busy, there's boats, and you can watch boats disappear over the horizon. And you can. But get a camera or a telescope and zoom in, and you can, if the boat has visually disappeared from view, with the telescope, you can zoom in and see, the boat appears again. And of course, you can watch it in the telescope do the same, disappear. And it looks as if, because it looked at the top, disappears last. It looks as if it's going over the horizon. The problem is, you get a modern camera. So if you visually disappears, telescope disappears, get a modern camera with the zoom. And after the ship has disappeared in your telescope, zoom into the camera, and the ship will appear again. Well, how does this work? If there's actually curve and it's disappearing over the curve, which it should, and you're seeing miles out, many miles out. Every mile is supposed to be an 8-inch drop. So you can do the math. If you're looking out 20 miles, there should be a whole lot of curvature in the way. But with these zoom cameras, you just zoom in and you can see the object. On the flat Earth, that makes sense. When you're talking about horizon, point of view, all the math and the science that goes into point of view, it explains vanishing point, and of course with cameras and telescopes, you're extending that vanishing point. You're looking past it. That's why things are coming back into view, because you're looking across a flat surface. with light, reflectivity, whatever's going on with temperature. That's what actually causes things to disappear. It's going past your vanishing point, as opposed to over the edge of the globe. At least that's the flat Earth explanation. And what's very interesting in here, and this is one of the things that really caught my attention, was an experiment, a video experiment done, I think this was up in the Puget Sound of Washington, where there's a number of islands across the bay. And with normal view, you can just barely see the first island. With a camera, you can zoom in and see second island and the far shore, and there's a city on the shore. And boats are always going in and out all around these islands. So he did a very good experiment. He went there several days in a row, morning, noon, and night, or I should say it was dawn, noonday, and evening, or dusk, just as the sun was setting. And each time he took these videos on a series of, like, I think it was 4 or 5 days, you had all kinds of different effects going on. In other words, sometimes you could see clear across to the city, the 2 islands and the city. Again, I don't remember the miles. It was very, very far, of course. But some days, again, same camera, same zoom, he could see the first island and just a little bit of the top of the second island. He couldn't see the next. It was as if the water rose up. There was like a curve in the water. But on other days, depending on the temperature, time of day, and moisture content, all of that, he could see clear across to the city. There was one day when he noticed it was in noon, so it was very warm. The curve of the water was so high, he couldn't see. There was 2 boats. There was one closer, one farther. He could only see half of the farther boat, and he could only see the top half of the first island. So what does this mean? Well, this means there's a scientific explanation. This has to do with mirage, temperatures, moisture, that causes things in your field of view to appear to rise up. I think the mirage effect, if I understand it right, my understanding is correct, is very similar. The mirage effect that you can see when you're out on a highway, a road that goes off in the distance, and it looks as if cars are coming out of the road. It's really hazy and wiggly. This is that same effect on the video that I was watching. And it seems to explain that because of temperature, humidity, as I mentioned before, it causes, I don't know what the name of it, I don't know if it's refraction or what, but it causes it to appear that there's a curve in the water. The water's coming up to meet your field of view, to hide stuff in the distance. And on cooler days, or if I understand it right, or with less moisture, the water sits level and you can see clear across. Your field of view is farther. So a lot of what people see, at least this is the flat Earth explanation, a lot of what people see out at sea, depending on what time of day it is, when they're watching ships or things disappear beyond the point of view of the horizon, it may just be explained by the science of humidity and temperature causing sort of a mirage effect to hide some of what's in front of you. In fact, this specific scientific phenomenon is why the Titanic sank. History Channel did an excellent documentary where they went in depth. They were examining boat records from that night, and they discovered that out over the sea, near the area where the iceberg was, and it was a big, giant iceberg and broke it up in chunks, according to all the other mariners, the captains do their sea logs, because those are kept in records. In Europe, when they were able to look at them, researchers found that there was a definite chunk of warmer air that was pushing down near in front of where the iceberg was. And this caused that mirage effect. And it doesn't matter day or night, it's still there off in the distance. So this would have obscured the lookout on the Titanic from being able to see the iceberg till the last minute, till it got through that mirage effect. Anyways, that's that. GPS is another thing. GPS, I've watched it's a video recording of tourists in Hawaii where the old World War II vet is pointing to, and he has his hand on this device, and it's got this big copper plaque, and it's the Global Positioning System plaque. They had global positioning system in the 1940s. They used it in World War II. That's what he was going over, how it works, from ship to ship, tower to ship, from the land tower to ship. And also, that reminds me, there's still a system today where they keep track of where ships are at sea, and it has to do with towers along the shore, towers to ships. So it's very interesting. GPS, they say it has to do with satellites, and you can hear plenty of experts say that they use satellites, but when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, at least historically speaking, GPS was invented before we had satellites, and it was ground-based. Now, sure, you can say, well, that means they transitioned to satellites. Well, maybe they did, but the fact remains it used to be ground-based. Why spend money to put stuff in the air when you don't need to? Anyways, it doesn't prove anything. It's just, it exists. The GPS system was on the ground before it was in the air, and it may still be. Obviously, the flat Earth argument is that, oh, that's, the satellites are fake, and it is still being done on the ground. I don't know. It might be. Another interesting piece of information, and again, just as a reminder, I'm going through all these things. This is why there's an argument between the globe and the flat Earth, because they seem to have some very good arguments, and they seem to have some questions that can't be answered. That's kind of the gist of why there is a flat Earth argument. Watching interviews with the astronauts, especially their very first interview of the 3 that came back from the first moon landing, but watching any of those interviews is very interesting. What they say, what they don't say, but their first interviews are very telling, especially if you watch the documentary A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. It's very interesting when you have that in mind. The Van Allen radiation belt is a bit of a confusing topic, because science says that there is, and they showed the big donut shape, there's a radiation belt in space that protects the Earth. However, this radiation belt, radiation is deadly, it's dangerous, radiation is deadly. We know this. I mean, I used to work in a nuclear power plant. Radiation was a very important thing. I used to wear a dosimeter, which would read radiation levels. You had to have that on you at all times when you worked at a power plant, because in case the nuclear power plant had a leak somewhere. And it never did, by the way. And I was security, so I walked in and all around all that stuff. I never had a problem. The one time, ironically, my dosimeter went off was when I was standing like right here, face to face, in front of my microwave at lunchtime. I had my dosimeter on as I'm waiting, cooking my lunch, and it went off. And I looked at it, and it was reading 14 something. I remember the number 14, but again, I'm bad at remembering numbers, so it was a lot more than I would ever get just walking around. And you did get a little. You could look at the end of the day and you'd get like 0.002 or 0.003 bit of radiation from walking around the plant. So you'd get a little bit. But standing there in front of that microwave, I got more radiation than I was ever supposed to. And I don't know if all microwaves are that way, but ever since then, when I put something in the microwave, I move away. And I can understand it. Some people, for health reasons, don't want a microwave in their house. I get it. That thing does release a lot of radiation. So yeah, Van Allen radiation belts is an interesting argument, because the Apollo missions, the ones that went out to the moon, it didn't affect them. I mean, you can watch the interviews online of the Apollo astronauts discussing the Van Allen radiation belts that apparently either didn't affect them or didn't exist at the time. I don't know. I just don't know what the explanation is there. You can watch the videos on the Orion project, which is this next set of moon landing missions. You were supposed to try and go to the moon here in 2020 again. And NASA admits that, well, they admit a few things. They admit that all the telemetry data has been destroyed. All of the math, everything that they figured out to get to the moon has been destroyed. That's a bit odd. Also, some of the original moon landing footage was lost. Not all of it, I think, if I understand it. But again, you can look this up online. NASA admits they've lost the footage, so that's a bit suspicious. Again, it just fits more into this boat of you can't trust NASA, which is very unfortunate. And I've said that before, but I love space. I love space. I love sci-fi. I love spaceships. I love all that stuff. I love looking at pictures of the globe, video of the Earth. But you know, according to this model, that's all fanciful fiction. It's not true. So yeah, the current Orion project videos are very interesting, because in these videos they admit that they have to figure out how to safely get the astronauts through the Van Allen belts. And it's just like, well, we already did that with moon landings. Or didn't we? I don't know. I've already mentioned Photoshop checking NASA photos, especially of the Earth. Very interesting. The live spinning globe shots from NASA, we already talked about that. Oh, one thing that should be mentioned is when you get into this, you begin to wonder, especially if you have a lot of cognitive dissonance. You're like, wait, are you trying to say that the flat Earth, the Earth is flat? And you say, how could the governments and NASA and science and all that keep this a secret? How come we have all these scientists saying, no, it's a sphere, and the media and the news? And it's a big question that comes up. If this is a conspiracy, the Earth is really flat, it's not a globe, that means this is a big secret, and they've kept the secret very successfully. And some people will have a problem with that. And a good example to explain how secrets can be kept is the Manhattan Project. And this is a good example because it's a very publicly known project. It's not conspiracy. This is right there in World War II history. The Manhattan Project created the atomic bombs. At least that's the official story. And this project, I've seen estimates as high as 250,000. When I took these notes, it was 130,000. But compartmentalization is key. Compartmentalization, that word is so key when it's trying to figure out how big conspiracies are hidden. But Manhattan Project is an example of a huge secret that was successfully kept by many, many people. And honestly, the reason is because of compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is where this person only knows this stuff. This person only knows this stuff. This person only knows this stuff. Yes, if this person knew this, and that, he could know this. But he only knows this. And he's only ever going to know that because compartmentalization. This is still used today for many different things. And this is why a lot of conspiracies remain conspiracy theory. But it is possible. It is possible. And talking about this, I had to talk about Antarctica. Of course, with the flat Earth, Antarctica is the outer edge. It's the border. There's no water falling off, at least as far as we know. I mean, I've never been out there, but they say that's the border. And what makes this very interesting is the Antarctica Treaty and how Antarctica is off limits to the general public. There's a lot of scientists that work down there. Several thousand, I don't know the exact number. And obviously people can take tours. At least I've seen video of tours, so unless that's fake. It seems like they don't go down there. They have a spot that's marked as the South Pole, and they'll admit it's not the actual South Pole. It's just the ceremonial South Pole. I think the North Pole is similar. But when after the Admiral Byrd expeditions, and he went down there, I believe, 2 times, and a number of other expeditions. After that, in the 1950s, this ties in with Project Dominic, Project Fishbowl, Project High Jump, which Admiral Byrd was a part. If you were to examine these projects and look into Antarctica and the exploration of it, and McMurdo Base and South Pole Base and all of this, and then shortly after that, the Antarctica Treaty, which banned all people from going to Antarctica, except for under controlled situations. It's they say it's the most successful treaty to date among so many nations. I think there's like 56 nations that have signed the treaty. So when it comes to arguments, and I've watched debates where flat earthers and global arguers will say, well, can you prove it? And the problem with Antarctica is you can't prove anything about the edge. Trying to figure out, is this the edge? Is it the edge of a dome kind of thing? It's hard to figure out because you can't go there, or at least it's very hard to. And you're under a controlled environment when you do try and visit. At least that's what they say. Again, I've never tried. I don't know. But, I mean, the Antarctica Treaty can be looked up online. And you can look up things online where they verify how they protect it. So it's supposed to be an environmental thing. They want to keep it pristine, which is a bit odd because it's ice. It's a whole lot of ice. I mean, Admiral Byrd's interview, he explained how it's at least the size of the U.S., if not bigger. And there's mountains full of coal. There's a lot of resources. It's almost as if God created it as a sort of extra resource hub right on the edge of our world with everything we needed in excess for technology, for production, for the benefit of mankind. I don't know. That's getting into speculation. But studying Antarctica brings up a lot of questions that can't seem to be answered from a globe perspective. One specific, I should say two specific videos, and if you go through my playlist, again, Flat Earth Study, you'll get to see these. There's one video of a balloon camera put up really high. We're talking over 100,000 feet. And while up there, cloudy day, the sun's in the image, and there's a hot spot on the clouds. A hot spot right beneath the sun on the clouds. I don't know how that's explained with this model. It's explained easily here. If the sun is only 70 miles up and it's going around, then of course it's going to be a hot spot because it's just above the cloud, literally. Is it 70 miles up? Again, I'm bad at remembering numbers. It's not that far up, according to this flat Earth model theory. There is an explanation. Of course, comets on the globe Earth are supposed to be rocks from space coming in, that kind of thing. Or not comets, asteroids. Asteroids, meteors, impacts. Asteroids, when they're in space, as they come to Earth, they're meteor impacts. And the explanation here is again the electromagnetic nature of the dome. And there's strange video footage which I've never heard any explanation from the globe point of view, but from the flat Earth point of view, it makes sense. There's this kind of like electrical charge and these little, they're called sprites that hang down, and it looks as if they're way up high there underneath the dome, right there at the edge. And they cause like discharges and sparks and like balls of fire that occasionally will let loose and fly down. And you can look it up. Thanks to security cameras, video footage from police cars, any meteor sighting we see seems to be some kind of ball of energy. Sometimes it'll break off in little pieces or completely break up. Other times it'll just be the ball of energy. And that matches the flat Earth explanation of the electromagnetic nature of the dome. And this is just some kind of electrical discharge. So that's interesting because that explains meteors and comets and asteroids. I definitely had that question. Now, there are reports, and you occasionally, if you're paying attention to the news and the details, especially from the science point of view, which I try to, I have seen reports. There was one not long ago of the Chinese space station was going to come down from orbit, like it's going to crash, it's going to be a meteor. And I've seen this before with other satellites that are degrading and falling to Earth. So I don't trust mainstream media, so I don't know if that really means anything. Obviously, from a globe Earth perspective, that would make sense. If you have all these satellites and things in space, some of them are going to, because of second law of thermodynamics, wear down, fall apart, crash to Earth. On the flat Earth, I don't know. Is that disinformation? Is it lies from NASA? Or is it true? Do they have satellites up there that they do sometimes crash? I don't know. One thing I've not heard Flat Earth explain is comets, what those are. I mean, I could imagine an explanation, especially if the dome is some kind of projection that God has built. It's just part of the projection. It's part of up there for display. It's similar if it's not a projection, but there is, space outside the dome. If we are floating in space and something like this, then it's probably what they say it is. It's actually a large chunk of ice and rock floating through space. Meteor impacts. This is a big one. What are meteor impacts? If we don't live on this globe, if we live on this, how do you explain meteor impacts? I've not heard an explanation for flat Earth for meteor impacts. We got to visit one as a family in Arizona. Pretty famous because it's such good shape. It's supposedly one of the newer meteor impacts. So how do you explain that from the flat Earth point of view? I mean, it's possible. We do have in the Bible, God sends stuff down from heaven. if this is the right model, then maybe that's just one of those things. It's something that was sent down from heaven. I don't know. The heavens stretched out. Ooh, a big question here, and this ties in with comets, but this is more specific. The Jupiter Shoemaker Levy 9 comet. When I was, this is goes back in the 90s, when I was a kid. I think we lived in Guam. I can't remember, but there was the famous Shoemaker Levy 9 comet that broke up into pieces and hit into Jupiter, and that was on video, and it's from NASA. But that was, recorded and posted. So I do kind of wonder, is beyond conspiratorial explanation, which I could come up with, is there a scientific explanation for what that was? I mean, maybe there doesn't need to be. I don't know. But I'm curious. Tides. I'm very curious how tides work on a flat Earth. Mark Sargent, when he goes through in the details of explaining, flat Earth and the dome, he would explain that there's systems built down underneath the sea that control that kind of thing, and maybe they do, because this is a controlled environment. But I guess I'd still like to see that explanation. Another interesting note is moon temperature testing, and you can do this yourself. You just buy a little device that you shoot a laser at any surface, and it'll tell you the temperature of that surface. Okay? So on a nice full moon night is the best time to do it. You go outside and point the laser at wherever the moon is shining. Take a temperature and do it on several different objects, several different things. Record the temperature. Then do the same laser test in all the shadows of the moon, where the moonlight's not shining. Shadows. Again, do it in several places. And you can do this on several, do it throughout space, throughout different months, do it in different places, Add some variables to the experiment, but make sure they're controlled. Make sure you get some good numbers and everything. This is very interesting because moonlight is colder. If the moon is supposed to be reflecting the light of the sun, I don't know what the explanation is. For the flat Earth, according to the Bible, the moon is one of the greater lights. It rules the night. So it's its own light. And this temperature reading would scientifically indicate that there's something different about the light of the moon. It's not the reflection of the sun. Of course, this immediately comes into the whole question, what about the eclipses and everything? And there appears to be a flat Earth explanation of there's other objects that are up here, and during eclipses, they move in place and block sunlight and different things, except for when the moon gets in front of the sun. Because apparently the moon rotates just a little lower than the sun, so sometimes that'll happen. It'll get in the way. So that'll be, except for that eclipse where the moon gets in the way of the sun, all the other eclipses are by these different objects up here in the sky. Because, of course, the globe Earth explanation is, let's see, the solar eclipse is lunar eclipse. The eclipse where the Earth gets between the moon and the sun, according to globe theory. They say, well, that proves the Earth is some kind of round because the shadow is round. Well, yes, scientifically, if that is a shadow, which it makes logic and sense that it would be, then yes, scientifically, whatever's getting in the way has to be round because it's creating a round shadow. And we're told that's this. And that seems to make sense based on the model that we're shown. However, that is a little harder to explain on the flat Earth theory. What is it? If the Earth's not getting in the way, what is getting in the way when there's a shadow showing up on the moon? So that still needs some more explanation, but there is a flat Earth explanation. And again, because science goes with this theory, if this one's right, then they're working hard to try and prove this with this information. So the science isn't focused on explaining that. So that's how come trying to explain the dome, the edge of Antarctica, and eclipses is hard to do because mainstream science is busy studying the wrong thing. And we have a good example of this in real life. Evolution versus creation. What's the Bible record versus the record of what science says. And so much science is put into studying the evolution theory which I think is very easy to demonstrate is wrong. But because so much science is put into that, not enough is put into creation science. So there are things in creation science that we don't fully know how to explain because science isn't being used to study it. So this might be the same problem. If this is fake, if we don't live on the globe, if we live on this, a lot of science is going in to study this and space and everything. So is that a waste of time? I don't know. 1946, White Sands, New Mexico test rocket video footage. It reached 65 miles. It was a V-2 rocket. 720-mile horizon. Report says atmosphere still and unmoving. Stationary Earth. And that's a video you can look up online on YouTube. 1946, White Sands, New Mexico test rocket. The most interesting one, I've started to get into it earlier, the Go Fast rocket launch, 9:30 a.m., Nevada desert, 14th of July in 2014. The date and time are important because when the rocket got up high, if my record's right here, 73 miles up, the Go Fast rocket launch, that is, the rocket launched from Nevada desert. Okay, so Nevada desert. It's a little off the edge here where it's broken. So this is the USA, Nevada. So the rocket comes 73 miles up here. 14th of July, 2014 at 9:30 a.m. The moon at this time is supposed to be, over here. Back, according to, this theory. The moon's out here over Australia. Well, not over Australia, but you'll see what I mean here in a minute. The moon's supposed to be on this side of the Earth. Okay, so the rocket launch is taking place on this side of the Earth. The moon's down over there. Well, they're 73 miles up with cameras, and this is the key thing. This rocket had cameras, so one pointing down and one pointing out. And Australia, being 18 hours ahead, it would have been July 15th, 3:30 p.m. No, a.m., sorry. a.m., 3:30 a.m., July 15th over Australia. The point is, this rocket here, on the video, only 73 miles up, saw the moon. The moon was off in the distance. You can clearly see it on the video. You can compare it to other videos where they go up and see the moon off in the distance. And that doesn't make sense on this model. You shouldn't be able to see the moon. Of course, makes perfect sense here. If the rocket is, here's Nevada, if the rocket's 73 miles up, the moon's over here, on top of Australia, that's what it was, in the direction, then that makes perfect sense. That's why you can see it. No matter where it is, when you get up high enough, you can see everything out here. So, what I wonder is if you could, this is to be questions for the flat earthers, if you could, put a rocket up at night, would you see the sun? If it's on the other side of the world, if you're doing your tests here, I guess it has to be here. Because here's America. This is where most of us live. Would you be able to see the sun over here? If you did a rocket test at night. I've never seen a balloon test done at night. And there might be reasons why it's a little harder to do at night, but it'd be neat if they did that. If they go up high enough, would you see the sun in the distance? Or is it beyond that, right, that vanishing point? I don't know. Another interesting problem that the globalists need to answer is the International Space Station. If I read the right thing, I remember it was on NASA's website. And again, we've already established there's things that cause you to doubt what NASA puts out. But NASA says that the International Space Station moves at around 17,000 miles per hour as it goes around the Earth. And if you know where to look it up, a lot of people have done it. They've been able to see the spot of the International Space Station as it goes across the sky. And I should have wrote more here. I have 8 minutes written here. I'm not sure if 8 minutes is how long it takes to get across. I don't know. But the interesting thing here is International Space Station is supposed to be up in a certain part of the atmosphere, and it's going at a certain speed. And according to the same scientists, meteors, when they crash through, coming down to Earth, and we see it. I mean, if you've been on a night, you've seen it. they go across the sky. They seem to like always skim across for some reason. Well, of course, in the flat Earth that makes sense. It's going across the dome. But here, anyways, yeah, that's besides the point. Meteor showers, the speed of when these rocks that are coming from space, when they're coming through, they're being destroyed. They glow and they're being destroyed. And so the question is, how come the space station, if it really isn't that part of the atmosphere, isn't being destroyed? Does it really matter the direction it's going? I mean, again, we see meteors and they seem to be going the same direction. They may not be. There might be like an angle. Maybe the meteors at the angle are being destroyed, whereas the space station, because it's going parallel, doesn't. I don't know the speed, but I do know the video I was watching where the guy brought this up with the speed of the International Space Station is a bit interesting. Maybe, and I don't know if anyone's done this, maybe you could take the live footage that NASA puts out and try and do some measurements, because again, you can usually see what's going on down there in the Earth and compare it to what's going on live. But yes, I think I've gone over most of the things, most of the factors. Hopefully this wasn't too boring for those of you who decided to watch. I mean, I would assume if you decided to watch this, it's because you're interested in this topic and you'd like to know, why do people believe in flat Earth? Why does this exist? And I've gone over most of the information that I've come across. Probably not all of it. I probably have missed some things. I do know that there are some questions that exist that it would be nice if flat Earth would get an explanation for. Because, of course, we have our explanation with the globe. Venus in the sky, its position. Why do the moon and sun appear to set the way they do? I mean, I think I've heard explanation here, but there could be some more that's put into this to understand it better. Why does anything vanish on the horizon? Again, I think that is explained with the vanishing point science, how far your eye can see and how that works. Of course, this is something that we'd love to explain. If this is the truth model, what keeps the sun and moon up there? How does that work? Besides the obvious, God designed it that way. What did he use? Because everything else here on the Earth, at least most everything else, there's a science behind it. There's the laws of nature that explain these things. One thing, I don't know, I think we do. We have an explanation for why the moon's face is always facing. With the flat Earth, how does that work? That's probably one of the bigger problems. If the Earth is flat, if we have this moon that's supposed to be a round object that's up there, as it's going around, why do we only have one face that always seems to be facing like in? Nobody seems to see any other edge of it. At least it seems that way. I don't know how that works on a flat Earth. Of course, we talked about solar eclipse. How does that happen? It has been brought up before. Well, the planets appear to be spherical, and the moon and sun and all that. Why wouldn't the Earth? But there's a disconnect in logic here. It's I always forget the term. It's an illogical syllogism where you're saying, well, if this, then that. You're skipping some steps in logic, but you don't realize it. And so I can understand it. I don't realize that everybody doesn't get in deep with thinking logically. But the Earth doesn't have to be Earth doesn't have to be round if it wasn't designed that way. If these things are put round on purpose, we're different, we're special. One of the reasons that's given for why the governments, intelligence, and NASA and all that try to hide the flat Earth is because they're hiding God. It's a little too obvious when you're looking at the specially designed structure that may exist. We're inside the specially designed structure. It's kind of obvious somebody designed that. And the God of the Bible, well, that's no problem. I'm trying to explain it from that point of view. Whereas a ball floating in space, especially in infinite space, so big, just seems to a little bit easier to see that, oh, we're nothing special in the universe. We're just a speck. It's always simplified. Evolutionists like to simplify things. But of course, if you have any questions, you can ask me on my About page. I have my what do you call it? Internet, email links, and those of you who know me in person, you can of course come and ask me in person. But I definitely, if you're interested in this topic and you really want to learn more, start with my playlist where you can really get into looking at all this stuff in more detail and determine for yourself, is this true? Is that true? What's true? And if you do look into it beyond the playlist, which there's lots of it online, both useful and useless information, there's a lot of different theories. There's the hollow earth theory, there's convex earth theory, there's the infinite plane theory where this isn't all there is. You know, you go beyond this and there's more ocean and more continents out here. Others think it's a big bunch of snow and ice, but there's other puddles like this, other worlds across this infinite plane, and the space is everything above. So there's a lot of different theories to try and explain what's going on with Earth. Of course, with the whole star pattern over us and always circling over us, that I think that kind of defeats the infinite plane, unless each world has its own dome of space above it, like its own projection, you know. I don't know. This is getting into a lot of speculation. And some people might say, well, this is just ridiculous. I'm not going to worry about this. It's a globe. And that's fine. And you can believe what you want. Where this topic is useful, and it has happened. It has happened. If you study this topic, you will find out there are a lot of atheists who, when they examine this model, and if they believe this is real, they jump right to this and, oh, well, this book is real then. The Bible's real. So that's where this topic is powerful. And you will hear it. They're ignorant. These Christians will say that this is a distraction, this argument, and they think this points people away. It doesn't. It's not true at all. When atheists find out that... This is the point. Atheists scoff, and I've heard it. It's happened to me. I've gotten into an argument years ago before I knew anything about this. Atheists scoff at us. They say, your Bible is a flat earth book. Why don't you believe the earth's flat? And of course, they ridicule that, but they know. They point out, those who've done the studies, and they don't study the Bible in depth, and they don't know the Bible. But since I've now looked into it, and I've examined these scriptures, and I see what the Bible says, I see, at least, you can argue that their Bible does seem to support this. Stationary, unmoving, under a dome, firmament, sun and moon, inside the firmament, earth. Unfortunately, the Bible doesn't anywhere say anything about the curve of the earth, the roundness of the earth, the sphericalness of the earth. The closest it gets is talking about God sitting on the circle of the earth, which from a mathematical point of view, you know, he'd have to sit on the side of a circle, or he can sit on it like this. That makes sense. This isn't a circle. It's a bunch of circles together. It makes a sphere. So the point is, the atheists who have examined this topic intensely, they're at the least a lot more open to the point of view of God. But I've heard many testimonies. Rob Skiba is a Christian who studies this topic. He's gotten lots of testimonies. We're talking many, many hundreds of testimonies of people who have come to Christ. They've come to believe in the Bible because of this topic. So, from that point of view, this is not a waste of time. And everything is not the same to all people. There is definite truth. This is definite truth. But not all truth exists in here. We know this from nature, from science, from the world around us. There's individual truths. There are truths that are relative. And some things are just better at this, at helping to explain God to people. C.S. Lewis is very famous, for those of you who know him well, for explaining that you need to come at, explaining salvation to people from different points of view, because some people, they need the science explained, and then they'll believe in God. Others, they need the philosophy explained, then they'll believe in God. Others don't care about none of that. They need fiction to get a hold of their mind, to bring them to the gospel. That's why C.S. Lewis wrote Chronicles of Narnia. And it's also, people argue against it, and that's because they don't know why Tolkien wrote his books. They put concepts and ideas and philosophy into fiction that points back to the Judeo-Christian point of view. This is very helpful, especially for those who love fiction and get into it. They grasp those concepts, they grasp those ideas, and later on, when people witness to them, they are more open to the Bible because they have been psychologically prepared. Their minds and hearts have been opened, have been softened to the subject. This is the same way. This is a very specific scientific topic, but this scientific topic can be a witnessing tool. Some people simply need someone to show them love and care. They just need that personal relationship in order to get them to Christ. Some people need a perfect social experience. Those are the ones who might go to church. When they find a really good church, they become open to the gospel there in that situation. So it's different for every single person. And, just think of how you got saved if you're a Christian watching this. And think of the stories you've heard of how different people came to know Christ. There's many different ways. Bottom line is, I guess, two big things. If you want to study this subject, with the internet, you have access to just about all the knowledge you can get. You just got to look, you've got to search, and you can learn anything you want to. And from a Christian point of view, there is a powerful argument here. If this is true, pretty easy to see, oh, God made that. And it's just, because I'm very aware of the subject, I know from the scientific argument, the privileged planet, that this is special. And you can prove that this, something God created, if this is true. I don't know. There's a lot of things. I'm not out there. I can't go to space. I can't go to a laboratory and perform physics, engineering experiments, chemical experiments. I've been around to a lot of places in the world. I've been up in a plane over 20 times. Haven't really traveled the sea that much, but and I haven't been to Antarctica. There's just loads of things I haven't done in person. So I have to trust in what I can observe with my eyes, what I can read, what I can hear with my ears. And the internet really helps you with being able to view and to see things. This is what is so important for researching. When you're trying to learn a subject, you take the time to look into it, to study it. You can figure things out. Use the scientific method, look for patterns, compare patterns, look at different points of view, be open-minded in the right way, and study whatever system it is you believe in. There's a famous quote which I have up here on my wall from Lord Beaconsfield. I say famous. It's better to say it's a good quote. It's a really good one. The subject or system that will not bear discussion is doomed. I heartily believe in that, and I've seen many quotes over the time, over my life, my time of researching, that would indicate that very same thing. The Bible touches on this when in Proverbs it says to beware about answering a matter before you've researched it, before you've studied it. The Bible talks about this. And there's certain concepts that you ought to be aware. All truth passes through stages, typically 3. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. So it's very possible. And that phrase specifically refers to those who have to deal with cognitive dissonance. Those people who would fall into the closed-minded category I talked about at the beginning when it comes to this subject or others. But you need to remember, there is a principle, which is a bar against all information, which is a proof against all argument, which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting condemnation. Everlasting ignorance. That principle is condemnation before investigation, by Herbert Spencer. I know I try not to ever do that, to condemn something new before I've investigated. It's definitely something I don't do nowadays. I might have done it back in the day. I probably did. Actually, I think I can remember myself doing it. Back when I was a foolish young man, I've tried to push away some of that foolishness and apply my mind, the mind God's given me. So, hopefully, on this topic, this has been helpful. Have fun researching.